very good and much needed vacation where I got to go to Phuket, Thailand to see my dad. He's moving back to New Zealand, moving via UK for 8 months. So yes, because he's got dogs there that he wants to take back to New Zealand. You can't take them straight to New Zealand from Thailand, so he's going to go and live in the UK for 8 months in order to get the dogs to New Zealand, and then he'll be back in New Zealand, and I'm looking forward to that. Although I must say, for probably 20 years, as long as I've been in Japan, actually, he's lived on and off in Thailand, or had their house there and lived there on the weekends when he was living in Singapore. And it was really, it's always nice going there, especially this time of year, which is the rainy season in Phuket between May and October. Compared to Tokyo, I mean, it's cooler. It's like 32, 31 degrees, whereas in Tokyo it's been 35, 36 most days. So yeah, it was a lovely trip. It was good to see everybody. It was also good just to get a break from, I've had a very, very busy time with work and with other stuff, and it was good to actually take a break from that, which, yes, a bit of a reset, and I am back, I am refreshed, and it is good to be doing this show. I've got 2 weeks of stories, which, I don't actually have a lot of stuff to cover tonight. So as always, if you want to catch me in a comment, remember, just at Mark Kiko Simon, it will show up orange to me in the comments, it will stand out. Always free to talk about whatever topics you want me to talk about, but otherwise I brought topics with me. If we've got a bit of time, I might have go at a little tune at the end, but we'll see how we go for time, and let's get into it. So yes, let's start by seeing who's in the comments. It's good to see everybody. Got Bold Birds boy, thanks for joining, especially I know it was short notice tonight and people might not have been sure that I was going to be here, so good to have you here. Steve from Berkeley, good to see you. Sergeant Bilko, awesome to see you. We've got Tokyo 503, hi gang. The boom is near, although it says Steve from Berkeley came a little bit later than I wanted it to, sorry about that. Mr. Cordy Chap, good to see you. We've got Quentin Rankin, good to see you. There are no technical issues, just technical people having issues. No, that doesn't sound better. Okay, I'll just stick to it. Yes, James Kelly, hi indeed, good to see you. Dan H, good to see you. And yes, hoping like Dan H that everyone here as well. We've got, who else we got here? That could well be it. In fact, I think that is it based on the comments right now. It is Obon in Japan. It's just been Obon during the last week. What is Obon? Obon is the time of year that, although it's not an official public holiday, many companies, many factories, particularly manufacturing companies, where they want everybody to take time off at the same time, will force their employees to take a week off. And it's the time of year that you go to your hometown and you go pay respect, you go clean up the family graves, give a bit of an offering, have a bit of a picnic, and say hello and have a discussion with your dead ancestors, which I actually think is quite nice. It's kind of, I understand it's something that the Irish do. Coming from a Protestant culture myself, we're pretty awful actually what we do. We're kind of afraid of going to cemeteries. We let them sort of often become kind of dilapidated and don't look after them. Generally speaking, I'm sure that I know that there are exceptions, but I do like the way that the Japanese, and it made me realize that, well, that Ireland has similar kind of things, at least with Catholicism and whatnot. I thought, well, it's actually quite nice to actually go and spend just the chance to connect and to think about our ancestors and whatnot. That said, of course, I went to the tropics on a vacation. I didn't actually do that, but I thought it was a nice thing if you're someone who does that sort of thing. And yeah, I had a great trip with the lad. And it was sort of, it was pretty, it was raining every day, but it was also hot and sunny every day. And so I had a great trip. So, yes. Sergeant Bilko, we've heard that before. The butter report should be a regular segment on the show. There's not a lot to report on butter at the moment, actually, which is funny hearing me say that. But yes, well, we could get into that. We could get into talks on free trade and whatnot. But yes, well, that's right. So I come from a place with a similar. Yes, again, Quentin Rankin, good point. I did not put Hong Kong on the list. This isn't really Hong Kong tonight. I don't think I'm qualified to talk about it too much, although I will touch on it. There is a documentary I've got shared in here which I would like to talk about. Hey Davo, good to see you. Just started here. Good to have you on. Good to have you join. But yes, anyway, so very mindful that I often say not a lot to talk about, and it turns out I do have a lot to talk about. Dan H, what are my thoughts on the anti-NHK guy that got elected, even though the only policy he has is to dismantle NHK? Well, that's a good topic, Dan H, and I'm happy to take you up on that as my first topic for tonight, because it's not on my list. Well, to be clear, well, it's not actually, well, yes, one guy from the party list was elected, although now he has a second member. So let's talk about this. Inkoku, which the abbreviation for the Protect the Japanese People from NHK Party. Well, what this is about is that this was a guy who became popular on YouTube, a lawyer who made a business out of challenging or supporting people who wanted to bring court case challenging their obligation to pay the NHK broadcasting fee. Now, most countries, I think UK, New Zealand, Australia have broadcast fees. I don't know about other countries, but the system works similarly in Japan as in those countries. For those of you who are not familiar, it's basically NHK is a public broadcaster, but it is not funded purely by tax. The government does give them some donations, but most of the funds that they use to operate are dedicated through a fee, which is basically obliged through a contract, and it's by law. You are. I don't know the exact, and this is where the guy who was from the anti-NHK party is a lawyer who specializes in lawsuits again for people who don't want to pay NHK. But it's basically by law. My understanding is that you. Now, what is it? The rule basically is that if you have a TV or and often you have to pay the NHK fee. Even if you don't watch NHK, you have to pay the broadcast fee. If you have a satellite dish, even if you don't watch NHK by satellite, you actually have to pay an extra fee as well. So, and the fees are quite high. They're like monthly, like 3,000 yen, $30 a month or something. It works out to be quite a lot of money, and it's and it's much higher than they would normally be able to collect via tax. It enables NHK to produce wonderful content. And I am a big fan of NHK, but it's a big fee. But the point is that it's not mandatory. Basically, they have legislation which says that if you have a TV or if you have a satellite dish or whatever, that you have a contract with them, but there's no legal enforcement mechanism that forces you to pay. So there are people who decide not to pay. And hey, Tai Nakamura, good to see you. And there's people who also say that they don't have a TV and they challenge it. But of course, the way that NHK collects this money is again because it's not tax, so it's not like they have inland revenue or tax collectors collecting the money for them. They have an army of people who basically are kind of people who volunteer to do it for a job, to go around to do NHK collections from houses, and I guess they get a commission from what they collect. Because of this, you'll often get kind of it's something like with taxi drivers in Japan as well. It's considered like a lower rung, like when you've lost all other jobs. It's kind of there are a lot of people who are sort of kind of people. It's like people who go around doing trying to collect newspaper subscriptions or whatnot. They can be very aggressive, the collectors, and it's not so much anti-NHK itself, and he's not trying to destroy NHK per se. He's focused on the system through which they collect the broadcasting fee, which are through these collectors who often come in and they lie to people and they say that it's mandatory that you have to pay. They demand to inspect their houses sometimes to see if they have a television or not when people say that they don't have a TV or whatever. And I've had this myself, foot in the door, really aggressive people. In fact, just 2 days ago, there was a case in the news where what sounds like there was another aggressive broadcast fee collector. And people have stories of having had the foot in the door, of being intimidated, of having people sort of, hit the doorbell like 100 times and stuff like that, and being kind of like very basically gangsters. And this is kind of the association. A lot of NHK fee collectors are associated with gangsters. And and they will litigate, and NHK will support them litigating to collect fees. And it's these collection tactics in particular which are the focus of the anti-NHK party guy. And it was basically the case a couple of days ago was someone went to the house of a Vietnamese apprentice visa worker, like these slave labor visas that they have. And apparently this person came demanding that the person pay an NHK fee, and the guy said to the police later that he didn't understand, the guy wasn't making any sense, to which the entire internet said, yeah, that's right, they don't make any sense, he's innocent. Where he actually got a fire extinguisher and unloaded a fire extinguisher in the face of the NHK collector, which everyone loved. The guy who founded the Protect the Japanese People from the NHK party actually started with an internet blog. You can find it somewhere if you look up NHK honestly, if you just look up NHK Bengoshi, for example, on YouTube, you'll find this guy's videos. And he gives tips for basically how to avoid NHK collectors, how to resist people forcing or intimidating you into paying. And he travels around the country supporting people suing NHK to not having to pay the fee. What the NHK party is essentially lobbying for is for the right to allow people, or for example TV manufacturers, to block NHK from their devices so that people don't have to pay the NHK fee, something to which the cabinet and NHK itself is vehemently against, of course, because everyone would just simply not watch NHK in order to not pay the broadcast fee. But this is the policy. This is they are a one policy pony, but they're not. Their mission is not to destroy NHK so much as to make the contract system a contract that you voluntarily enter into, and that you can opt out of voluntarily as well, and that you are only subject to it if you watch NHK, and that basically putting electronic devices on TV that allow people to opt in or opt out and voluntarily contract to pay NHK. And again, Mr. Korichip, sounds like protection money, but I think it's the same in Australia. It certainly is the same in New Zealand and UK, from what I understand as well, the system. He now has a second member. You may recall a few months ago that there was a story about a politician from Ishinokai who went on a parliamentary visit to the occupied Japanese Northeast Territories, which are the Russian Southern Kuril Islands. And while he was there and extremely drunk, and sexually harassing a Russian woman, he also suggested at one point loudly about, why don't we just start a war with Russia to get the islands back, for which he was expelled from his party. And because he was from the party list, the party said he should resign. He should give up his seat because he's no longer in the party. And he said, no, I won't resign. We should be allowed to debate anything as politicians, including drunkenly declaring war on Russia, if you like. I mean, hell, why not? So he's found a new home. He's become the second member of the Protect the Japanese People from NHK party. So that would be kind of fun. Now they have two people in parliament. So that's what's happening. And what do I think about that? I think that the broadcast fee system is stupid. Again, I'm a lawyer by training. The test of anytime you want to know if you've got a contract or not, you can have a contract verbally, you can have a contract by understanding, you can have a contract by email, you can have a contract by Twitter, you can have a contract, on a parchment with the seal. There's all sorts of ways you can have a contract, but there are 5 elements. OACIC. Was there an offer of a contract? Was there an acceptance of that offer? Was there certainty of the terms of what people were agreeing to? Were the terms of the contract actually understood by both parties? Was there an intention by both parties to have a contract between them? And is there a consideration or payment paid in acknowledgement of the contract, or in order for the promise to be made? Those are the 5 elements of any contract. And the broadcast fee operates on a contract law system rather than on a tax system, but yet there's I guess they're saying that the offer is the law, which says if you have a TV, buying a TV is considered the act of acceptance, but the terms are not really known or vague. There certainly often isn't intention to pay their broadcast fee. So the other essential elements of consent, certainty, acceptance are missing. So if you ask me, NHK, I love NHK, but NHK should be purely tax funded. It shouldn't be funded by broadcast fee. That's my opinion, and to that extent, I'm with the NHK party people. Yes. So yes, I agree with them. And you know what I said tonight? I don't have many topics, and we are already 20 minutes in, and I've just not even started yet. So good job, NH. But actually, this is what I want. This is what I want to do. I want to talk about the things that you want to talk about. So yes, there we go. That is, and I've had scary, dodgy NHK fee collectors. By the way, I pay the NHK fee. I do, because especially when you have a kid, you actually do appreciate the content of it quite a lot more. Right now, the only TV I actually watch is the NHK News, which I record. I don't really watch regular TV anymore. It's the same talento, which aren't very talented, which are the same talento that were on TV in the 90s when I was learning Japanese, and they were young and interesting and exciting talento, and now they're all like, as they were back then, 10 years older than me. Now it's basically like watching a freaking old people's home of old people trying to act loud and obnoxious and yet 20 years younger than they are. They don't allow new talent to come through. It's the same people on all the shows. It's boring. So yeah. NHK for me is the only thing worth watching, but the broadcast fee system sucks. So there you go. Hey, Cal Winston, good to see you. That's a handle name I don't recommend, but I don't recognize. been in Japan too long. I'm forgetting English. But good to have you on the show, and yes, indeed, it is a lot of money, and I pay it. But wow, in day and age, yes, the drunk guy. Well, believe me, there's probably more than one drunk guy in Parliament. But yes, that particular drunk guy who declared war on Russia is still in Parliament. Yes, even those parties trying to make him resign to free up the seat so that they can replace it. So there we go. And yes, indeed, Sergeant Book. I'm pretty much all about streaming now as well. In fact, I've got some topics today, including about things that I've streamed and watched lately, including on the flight back. I should mention, not on my list as well for tonight. So I still haven't started yet. I watched the 3rd season of Glow. Probably would have been better if I hadn't binge watched the whole thing in one hit. It's a little bit. Season 2, I binge watched in one hit, and it was awesome. It was one of the best things I've actually watched in ages. Season 3 maybe wasn't so set up for watching all in one hit. It was good how it developed the characters, but you know, it was kind of like there wasn't so much wrestling. I found elements of it a little bit frustrating, although I still think it's a brilliant show. So I recommend it, although not as good as season 2. But yes. Mr. Cordy Chat, Pico sounds like he's going to be their 3rd member. Well, the point is, the reason that they got elected was there's a lot of people like me who recognize that what this guy does, and you can watch his videos on YouTube, it's common sense. You know, it actually makes a lot of good, reasonable sense. A lot of people didn't mind giving their party vote to them because they're making sense and because they don't like the way this NHKFU system works. So even though, yeah, they're a one-trick pony, it kind of makes sense. So, the Ashes... how's that going? At least I hope the Poms are making it interesting. It's always good, actually, when the... it's like with the rugby, you know. I mean, again, sorry, New Zealand creamed Australia on the weekend, but, you know, it was good. We were actually happy when Australia beat us in the first game because, you know, when you have a trophy for 17 years, you know, you want it to be a little bit more interesting. So, yeah, 209 for 5. Well... I guess that's a pretty good score, although it depends on the type of pitch that they're on, I suppose. Let's get into the topics. Poop. Tokyo Bay is full of poop. The governor of Tokyo, former minister of the environment, Yuriko Koike, decided it would be a great idea to have the Olympic triathlon and a bunch of events swimming in Tokyo Bay. Now, I have, funnily enough, an Aussie friend who are on a drunken bet with some friends who are also drunk years and years ago, like 15 years ago. The loser of the bet had to go swim 100 meters and back in Tokyo Bay, and they did that, and they were sick for weeks. Tokyo Bay is, of course, it used to be almost literally like a toxic waste pool, and there's been a lot of, again, when I used to do environmental policy stuff, people point out that Tokyo Bay has cleaned up a lot from the 60s and 70s when it was basically like a toxic waste pool. It's a relatively normal ocean. There are fish in it again, huge progress, but it's not a place that I would go swim ever. Like I said, I know people who've swam in Tokyo Bay and they got sick. I have no problem swimming or surfing outside of Tokyo Bay, in Kanagawa, and in fact in Shimoda, just 2 hours from Tokyo. You've got some of the clearest, most beautiful water that I've seen anywhere in the world, including Australia and New Zealand. You've got Tateyama, you've got Chiba, all that's fine. Japan has really strong coastal currents that actually make sure that the open water is actually, kind of fine. But Tokyo Bay, not so much. And, while they made a big deal about cleaning it up, it is not particularly clean. And, the water there contains a lot of E. coli, basically, poop germs from sewage and whatnot. And, they've held some test events to see if it will be good for the Olympics, including a triathlon and an ocean swimming race. And they had to cancel an event yesterday because the poop germ levels were double what it was supposed to be. Rio pool water, well, it's probably on that sort of a level. Days ago they had an event where the swimmers said, apparently they can only hold events if the sea water for international triathlons, if the sea temperature is between 16 degrees and 32 degrees, and it was 31.5 degrees. It was basically like getting into a hot bath, and the athletes complained the water smelled like swimming in a toilet. They also complained that the visibility was so poor they could not see their own hand while they were swimming in the water. So it was disorienting and choking of this poopy smell. And not good. And my suggestion is you don't have to have this event in Tokyo Bay. If you are going to have it in Tokyo Bay, the former Minister of Environment, clean up Tokyo Bay, but I don't think you can do that in 1 year. I think they should change the location seriously. I think it's like Odaiba. I love Odaiba. You get to go shopping there. You got the big, Fuji TV, is it, ball there and everything. It's a cool location for everything other than swimming in the ocean. Although it's a lovely looking beach. So yeah, that's a thing. That they should. It's one of many things about the Olympics. I mean, this is the time that they will have the Olympics next year, and it's like 37 degrees. It's nuts, and it's not a, and it's a high humidity. The past couple of days it's been 36, 37 because of the Fein effect of air coming off the mountains, which is dry air. But now from tomorrow it's going to go back to the off the sea, from the southerly winds hitting Tokyo, and it's going to be humid and hot and choking, and it's just going to be horrible. And it really is a terrible, even back in the 60s when the average temperatures in Tokyo were like 5 degrees less than they are now. Not climate change, by the way. It's called the heat island effect. It's all the concrete around Tokyo and the lack of trees and whatnot, and all the air conditioning units pumping hot air into the air. The areas around Tokyo, there is global warming. There is the 0.5 degrees or whatever that people think the temperatures have changed globally in the last 50 years. The reason Tokyo has changed by 5 degrees is just because it's gotten so big, and there's so much concrete, and there's so much air conditioning, and there's so much radiating heat with nowhere to escape over Tokyo that back in the 60s when they last had the Olympics, you'd have nights below 25 degrees once or twice a year. Now you have them 70 days a year, sometimes 2 months in a row. Days above 33 or whatever they consider to be a extreme heat day. Again, used to be rare events. Now they're like regular events that go on for weeks and weeks. And back in the 60s when they had that much better weather, they decided it was still too hot, and they held the Olympics in October when the climate was much better. But again, pro TV. So what can you do? It's gonna be really, really rough next year, and they're experimenting with cooling strategies. But seriously, I just came back from Thailand, and I was like outside every day, and it was like 32 degrees, but it was tolerable and lovely down there. Here, I don't want to go outside. I want to be under air conditioning basically until October, pretty much. It's just going to suck until then. So yes, this is wow. I have made no progress in one story in 30 minutes. Although I don't have many stories, it looks like we are going to. It is going to be fast paced after all. This guy is the advisor to the former Emperor Hirohito, or the Showa Emperor as we call him in Japan. And his personal diaries have recently become public or published. And, basically he would take extensive, he would almost verbatim take down the conversations he had with the Emperor, both during and after, for 10 years after the war. And particularly his notes from the period after the war when there was a new constitution written, and the Emperor trying to figure out his role. Have become public, and it's really, really fascinating. It's actually an insight into he's recording word for verbatim the conversations with the Emperor, and it kind of goes to show how the Emperor is a little bit lost under the new constitution. He was basically proactively briefed about everything that the government was doing. He would give input to it, so he would. He was, there was a kind of the idea, the way that the Emperor was protected after the war was the idea that he was gardening and he was a botanist or whatever, but he was involved in decisions of government during the war and before the war. And that's reflected in these notes where, he's kind of like looking for a role as a figurehead leader, and how he's supposed to do that. And when there are these sort of crises and events, and, he keeps saying, I should talk to the government, I'd like to be briefed. I'd like them to tell me what's going on, at least with regards to, foreign affairs. I'd like to, give some input into the idea of the self-defense forces and whatnot. He had all of these ideas, and the advisor basically said, very much like if you could imagine, well, if you've seen the TV series The Crown, probably not dissimilar. We had an advisor who's basically saying, no, you can't do it, And probably the advisor was partly trying to protect the Emperor from getting into trouble from doing all of these things, but, from causing a constitutional crisis, and to shield him from the question of responsibility during the war. But of course the Emperor himself, he wasn't sure what to do, and this came out very plainly with these diaries. So if you talk about a good thing about NHK and why I love NHK, is that probably conservative media would wonder about even publishing this. There are still kind of extreme right-wing groups in Japan that prefer to take the archaic view of revering the Emperor like a divine sort of a figure, and they would be opposed to publishing diaries or conversations. with him as a normal person with worries and concerns. But of course NHK is generally kind of has a liberal slant on it, and it's actually been publishing night by night, very carefully, not with too much of an agenda, but they've been open about publishing these materials, which are just fascinating. So yeah, that was kind of cool. This was also cool. That's from Phuket. That was went canoeing with the lad on the second to last day around the Hong Islands, which is sort of in between the beach, the Phi Phi Island and Phuket. And that was very, very cool. We were just, on the open ocean. There were a bunch of islands. It was a cool sunset. I took a photo. I made a tiny planet out of it. And it was quite a good photo. I like taking these sorts of photos. This is kind of funny. Lots of comment on this today. What the Japanese... And by the way, I don't think this is just Japan. This is pretty much worldwide. And it's pretty obvious why, but let's go into it. What do Japanese kids want to be when they grow up? For 30% of boys, YouTubers, it seems. I'm not exactly sure who they got for that photo there, but for junior high school boys, 30% of boys want to be online video creators, living the dream. Pro esports player, 23%. I also understand that as well. Video game creator, 19%. So it's pretty narrow there. And then IT engineer, 16%, giving up their dreams pretty quickly. And then the megalomaniac, 14% that want to be a company president. For girls of the same age, a voice actress or singer, 18%, a manga artist, good to see actually, 16%, nurse, 14%, civil servant, 12%, and nurse, again, I don't understand why nurse came up twice there, but a little bit less ambitious. People saying that civil servant isn't very ambitious, but in Japan you have to be like the very top of the academic elite to be able to get in there. You get great lifetime benefits, unfireable, actual authority and power. It's actually not a bad thing to be a civil servant in Japan. So those are actually probably a bit more practical. For high school boys, quickly losing their dreams, as you can see. In fact, YouTuber kind of drops a little bit. IT engineer comes up, which I'm glad to see actually from a future of the economy perspective. Company president, 17%. It's actually quite good if they want to be more, I see not just company president, but entrepreneur, which is actually, it's a good sign of the times. Back in the day, people just wanted to work for big companies as, working ants, so that's kind of good. YouTuber, 12%. Video game creator, 12.3%, and manufacturing engineer, 11.3%. That's also probably a good sign. I guess that's when they started to think about going to, Semongak or going to apprenticeships and so on. For high school girls, civil servant becomes number 1, 15%. Nurse, number 2, 11%. Also good for the future, but really interesting that I assume even in mixed high schools, the girls are trending so differently. Singer, voice actress, performer, 8.8%. A psychologist, oh my god, 8.5% of women want to be counselors and psychologists. An office worker, 8%. Well, not quite sure actually. I feel a little bit bad for the high school girls. Office worker seems, again, they seem a lot more anchored to reality. Although it's a little bit disappointing that none of them want to be like unicorns or candy floss vendors or something that inspire a little bit more dreamy and hopeful. But yes, so kind of interesting there anyway. But certainly the idea of online creators and esports players is something that's there. Sergeant Buko is going to be a hippie when he grows up. Well, there we go. No aspiring bus drivers, silly kids. Well, I don't think they're going to be. I think that the bus drivers will be the IT engineers and the manufacturing engineers, because those buses are going to drive themselves. There aren't enough bus drivers out there. So, I think that's probably being practical minded. In fact, I think probably for my money, IT engineer and entrepreneur is kind of on the money actually, which I think high school boys were generally, that's right, they were. So they got their heads screwed on relatively well. I mean, a little bit of a worry about the 12.8% that want to be YouTubers, at least as a profession. But yes, Dave O'Hunter, no, I don't know what the no was for, but there we go. I mean, who knows? I saw this just before I went on my vacation, The Gate of Heavenly Peace. Maybe I actually talked about this on the last show, but it's a great documentary. It's about the Tiananmen Square protests leading up to the Tiananmen Square massacre. But it involves interviews with the student leaders who were involved. in this. I'll come back to the quick question by Quinn Rankin. How many coders are there in Japan? That's a good question. Generally speaking, one, I don't know. Of course, there are a lot of coders who work at Fujitsu and NEC and Hitachi that do custom Unix-based systems, and a lot of Japan is still custom-based systems. At the same time, there are a lot of IT engineers who are familiar with, obviously, more modern JavaScript, SQL, C++, as well as, now cloud engineering, Microsoft stuff. So it's becoming more now coding in English, and coding based on you don't get coding with existing Western software. That's becoming more globalized. But yes, there are a lot, and they're generally there are a lack of coders from Japan, from what you hear, Dan H. I think there are the demands for coders in Japan. They certainly are insufficient to meet the demand, and they're undervalued, they're underpaid, and they're under-recognized in Japan. They're very good quality engineers, but it's not a well-rewarding profession, which is a shame. Hey, Andrew Mulway, good to have you in here. But I think Japan does have quite a large number of IT engineers, and this is actually now where the competition for existing good IT engineers, particularly, for example, artificial intelligence engineers, NTT Data has just started announcing that they'll pay 6-digit salary, US dollar 6-digit, they'll pay over $100,000 or over 10 million yen yearly salary for new graduates, where normally you'd expect as a new graduate to get less than 5 million. They're offering to starting salaries of like 13 million, 14 million for people who can code and do IT, AI engineering. So it's if you've got a kid in high school, it's a good area to nudge your kids towards. There is a shortage, but it's not through a lack of interest. It's through complete over-demand, particularly with the declining population. And the economics are starting to correct around that. So coming back to this, I highly recommend. It's a long documentary. It's 2 parts. It's 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours. So it's nearly 3-hour documentary. But it's basically interviews with people who were involved in the student leaders. And while you might expect, every documentary I think I've ever seen on the Tiananmen Square massacre focused pretty singularly on these were the protesters. They wanted democracy. They were there for 10 days. The party wavered. Some people came into Tiananmen Square and supported the protesters, and then on the last minute the hardliners sort of sent in the tanks and they started running people over and shooting people. And that's kind of the compressed narrative of the Tiananmen Square massacre that I think I've always had since 1989, remembering at the time. I think it kind of gets forgotten now how long the protests went on for. And what I loved about this documentary is just how nuanced it was. It was these are interviews with the protesters, most of whom obviously are in exile, but it shows how completely confused and chaotic the protests themselves were, how completely lacking in strategy and how ad hoc they were. The ad hoc element is a little bit like the Hong Kong protests. There are definitely parallels you can draw to the Hong Kong protests right now. And I see that Andrea Moboy actually has a comment there. HK protest, not great. Your mum being HK born is worried. Protests here in Melbourne with HK and protests. Yeah, I've seen that as well. So, bearing up, of course, the concern as well with the Chinese military police being in Shenzhen, preparing possibly to intervene in Hong Kong. But again, just for kind of in a way reliving and understanding just how complex and how these protests happened, and certainly how flawed the student protests themselves were. They were kind of there was a fear that the protests obviously were by the party, for example, that this could have been another restart of a student movement like the Cultural Revolution. They weren't sure if these people were going to come in, and the students themselves, they were protesting and campaigning for something that they didn't themselves understand or internally even practice. Democracy was something they got support from people in Hong Kong, but the student movements themselves were often kind of authoritarian. They were confused. They had a lot of young people who were kind of talking about, there were debates about whether democratization should be incremental within universities or if it should be the whole country at once, or if it should be revolutionary. There are people within the student movement who wanted there to be bloodshed, who were wanting a massacre even though they didn't want to be involved in it, and were saying as such. So it's it kind of shows kind of in a way an ugly side, but I appreciate the complete view of the protests. It doesn't overemphasize the massacre, although that is obviously a big part of it, and it doesn't it shows that as brutally as it does as well, but at the same time it shows the overall context of the protest movement, what it was. It does bear reminding that Hong Kong is very different to these protesters in Tiananmen, in the sense that they didn't really understand what they were protesting for. They had a very abstract understanding of democracy, or what they were protesting for, and how to go about bringing it about in a huge country like China. Hong Kong, on the other hand, is very much, well, again, I don't know enough about Hong Kong to really speak authoritatively about it, but obviously what I understand to be the difference is, I think you've got two things. You've got one, you've got already a very sophisticated democratic civil society that exists in Hong Kong, pre-existing, and a well-educated population that understands their rights and understands the importance of protecting those rights, and that understands what they see, and probably correctly, is the mainland Chinese agenda of eroding those rights over time to sort of normalize and make Hong Kong basically over time the same as the rest of China. And particularly threatening incremental steps towards that, like this extradition treaty bill, and the threat that represents, the idea that could become a legal basis, that the protesters themselves who are involved in these protests could be bundled off. And remember, there are already cases in Hong Kong of people like bookstore owners that publish books critical of the mainland Chinese government, who have suddenly disappeared, and they've popped up in mainland China, where they've written strange letters back to their families saying that they decided to take a sudden vacation to China, where they met authorities and are now happily cooperating with them. Kind of scary. Like there are already cases where it looks like mainland China's gone and kidnapped people from Hong Kong and taken them over the border to China, and then arrested them formally inside China. And the idea of an extradition bill is obviously, it puts everybody in China under that threat of, gradual repression by the central Chinese government, and particularly young people who understand the risk that represents to their civil rights are understandably, forcefully making their voices known within the democratic system that Hong Kong has. And why the government there, they've declared the bill as dead. If it's dead, just withdraw it, just do what the protesters want. I mean, it's a reasonable claim. And it's one that supposedly the government's already acceded to, and the fact that they don't take it away. There's a risk now that it looks like the Hong Kong government, at least the governor who's appointed by mainland China, is kind of not willing to do it, because they do intend to do something about this, which undermines trust in that government, which is a government set up under the one China, or two systems, one China, model idea. And if that doesn't work, well, that's going to force a situation where, it's going to bring out people within Hong Kong who are going to be opposed to Chinese sovereignty, and that is what risks forcing China's hand into something that could make Hong Kong a tragedy. As someone who obviously wants Hong Kong to be successful, I mean, obviously, I do. You always hope that somehow the two systems, one China system, can work. And again, thinking of Taiwan as well. But there we go. It's like at the moment, and certainly if China does directly intervene in Hong Kong, well, that's going to be the end of Taiwan ever agreeing to merging voluntarily with China. That might force the issue militarily with Taiwan as well, actually. It could have consequences that go far beyond Hong Kong. So from that perspective, really, who's got the control over this is the Hong Kong government. And given that the Hong Kong government's already recognized that the core demands of the Hong Kong protesters are reasonable, that they've at least paid lip service to the idea that they should take back this extradition law. They should just follow through and do it. Why they're playing chicken with these protesters in a way that could ultimately destabilize and ruin Hong Kong and beyond doesn't make sense. Anyway, so around that, to understand, slightly different, but probably the best documentary I've ever seen about Tiananmen, and captivating to watch. I love interviews. I don't like someone narrating to me a documentary. Sometimes, of ancient history, you can't help it. But what I really appreciate about this documentary is that these are interviews with the participants in a very self-critical way. And it shows a very warts and all kind of, self-critical, still shows it as what it is. There was a massacre of pro-democracy protesters who were unarmed and peaceful in Tiananmen Square in China. But it also shows that, it wasn't a simple event like, we all, like media likes to boil everything down to. And for that, it's actually, especially in the context of what's happening in Hong Kong, although it's a very different situation, it's very worthwhile watching this, The Gate of Heavenly Peace. It's on YouTube and it's worth watching. Quint Rankin, probably the Hong Kong government is worried that if they give in, there will be other demands. Well, perhaps, but again, they haven't given in to this one demand, and certainly the fact that they've not given into it is likely to trigger all these other sort of demands. And you do worry about mob rule and anarchy and whatnot, but at the same time, the extradition bill is still tabled. They haven't withdrawn the bill. They could, even though they've said it's as good as dead. They could, in some late night session, they could pass it any time. I think it's a reflection that the protesters understand the democratic and legislative process and can influence it, that they're doing these protests. I think the Hong Kong government should take the first step and withdraw the bill. And look, if they get proven, if the protesters keep acting crazy after that, then the government will be proven right, and they've got all the tools of government, including mainland China, behind them to do whatever they need to do. But the fact that they are not withdrawing the bill in the first place, I think, means that they're the ones that are the provocateurs in the situation more than the protesters. That's my view. The protests are peaceful, and by the way, let's also be clear: the act of protesters, for example, detaining that journalist and tying him up. Also, there was a case of in the airport where a police officer was like holding down a lady who fell down. He went to hold her down, looked like he was going to move to arrest her, and a bunch of people rushed the police officer. One person grabbed his baton and started hitting him, and he drew his gun on the people that were started beating him. That was a life or death situation for the police officer, and I think actually that would have been very fortunate that no one was shot in that situation, because that's a situation that a police officer, the less rational police officers in many parts of the world, probably would have pulled the trigger. That was an amazing video to watch. No question in that case that protester who pulled the baton and started hitting the police officer with it, that person should be in jail. Like that's not a protest. That's attempted. It's pretty close. That's a life-threatening situation for that police officer, and that's inconsistent with certainly peaceful protesters. They should not be getting tear gassed and beaten up, and the police have been overly brutal and whatnot. But no question, there's been a lot of wrong on the parts of the protesters, and they're going to lose their credibility if they keep having people within their movement do things like that. But on the whole, I think that the protesters have a point, and the government's already acknowledged that point, so they should make good on it. That's my view. Carrie Lam won't do it. She won't withdraw the bill. Well, she's pro-Beijing and appointed by them, but she's still got to keep the profit. She's still got to keep Hong Kong together. You can't risk having it become anarchic. And the thing about Beijing, the one thing I give credit to Beijing about is that they play a long game. They're not in anything for an electoral period. They're not waiting for the election next year. They're not in it for the next 2 or 3 years. They're thinking 20 years ahead. And if you're thinking 20 years ahead, what's that deal? It's 50 years from 1997 till 2047, right? That they at least agree to keep a separate system in Hong Kong. Beijing knows, and if they maintain the single-party rule over mainland China, the leaders have nothing to worry about waiting to 2047. And they're going to get their way in the end anyway. There's no reason for Carrie Lam or for Beijing to feel like they have to accelerate this process, particularly in this way now, which in itself is kind of depressing, right? From a Hong Kong's perspective, their freedom is going to disappear within our lifetimes, and that's pretty depressing. But all the more reason they don't need to, I think, run the country and run Hong Kong into the ground now for the sake of accelerating it. When it's going to happen anyway. Which is the broader problem, of course, for the protesters. Another thing that I watched on Netflix, has anyone watching this been watching, has anyone seen The Great Hack documentary? It's kind of getting plugged pretty heavily by Netflix at the moment. It's a documentary about Cambridge Analytica and what they did. And Andrew Morboy, by the way, just to round out on Hong Kong, well, I certainly remember in New Zealand and Canada were much easier than Australia to get visas and to move out of. So basically, There were a couple of things that happened in the 1990s. I think first when Taiwan ended martial law, and I think it became easier to get passports, and then not long after that, of course, with the coming of 1997, there were a lot of Taiwanese and Hong Kong Chinese who moved all of a sudden to New Zealand and to Canada. And I remember in my high school, I was in an area with a particularly good high school, so this is the area that people would target to go buy land, and it was pretty common that they'd send their kids away pre-1997 worried about the same thing. And probably, I imagine you'll see another rush exit probably ahead of 2047. But yes, my first year of high school, there were like 2 Taiwanese guys. By my final year of high school, in my class of 40 boys, by my final year, my class was like more than 50%. So yeah, it was. It's happened before, and it's probably going to happen again over a longer period of time. Coming back, Cambridge Analytica, it's really fascinating. So this documentary basically explaining how Cambridge Analytica claims and how people believe that they were able to manipulate Facebook data and Facebook advertising to manipulate targeted people, both within Britain over the Leave EU vote and over the US presidential election. To be able to, the idea is that not that the Cambridge Analytica was able to change the entire psychology of the entire country. It was that they were able to identify swing voters within swing states and profile them extensively and be able to bombard them with ads, and everywhere that they look over the internet with subtle political advertising that would influence them to lean towards voting for Trump and against Hillary. And they reckon it came down to only like 70,000 people. I've had a lot of Americans complain to me that America didn't vote for Trump because Hillary won the popular vote, but America's always, in UK and New Zealand and Australia, we've had these geographic voting systems. There are countries like Israel, like Sweden, that have these pure proportional systems, but we don't have electoral systems like that. We never have had them. Well, New Zealand have mixed member proportional now, but so I still hold, America's responsible as an entire country for the outcome. For its government is elected by its people, and their democracy hasn't changed. But certainly, what's happened is that, and there have always been political advertising and political campaigning and people sort of lying in order to get elected. Listen, none of these things are new. Gerrymandering, is an ancient practice. Drawing districts in order to get advantages. But certainly what we had, what this documentary, The Great Hack, is about, it's about Steve from Berkeley. The way that Americans say republic, use the term republic, is different to the way that the rest of us who speak English use republic. But yes, I know how. Republic isn't an opposite to democracy. In most of the English-speaking world, it means a country where a head of state is not a monarch. But I realize in America you've redefined a lot of words like that, so it doesn't really match up. But the point being, back during the Cold War, democracy and capitalism were what America was supposedly fighting for, and it's as true now as it was back then. But the point being, and what this documentary is about how what Cambridge Analytica used was apparently military grade, like psychological operations technology, that they are not allowed to use within UK apparently, or that they but that they used. I don't know how that jives with the Leave EU, by the way. They're not allowed to export that technology. It's weapons-grade PSYOPs technology that they were basically that they were able to give cases, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, and in other countries where they were able to influence politics, that they were able to in America as well. Not just regular political ads, but actual ads that were intended and designed to psychologically manipulate people. And I saw this and I kind of thought, well, okay, so they're using psychological weapons and Facebook ads and using Facebook data in order to target this more accurately and being able to target a very small number of people to be able to pivot them and do whatnot. But in the end of the day, putting a dozen ads that Hillary Clinton's crooked and show us the emails and all this sort of stuff, it still is. It's just more sophisticated advertising. I mean, that is pretty much most people who use that Facebook data use the data not for winning elections. They use it for making money, and it's very effective for that. And that's what advertising is about. And political advertising has since forever been the same thing. Quinn Rankid, in the parliamentary committee where they interviewed the former executive of Cambridge Analytica talking about the technology that they were using. This is for the British military. Apparently she said that the technology that Cambridge Analytica used for their secret, algorithmic, advertising strategy and profiling of people that they used. Apparently she said in a British parliamentary committee, hearing, that it was prohibited from export as under weapons export rules from the UK, as a UK company. So it's again, this was what was sort of delivered to Parliament by a former exec of the company, and this was basically the origin of this technology that was being used by Cambridge Analytica was psychological operations technology. But at the end of the day, so I kind of watched it, and my father, who's ex-military, we're talking about it, he was sort of saying, yeah, it makes, and this is the thrust of the documentary as well, if people are using PSYOPs technology for electoral advertising, it really makes you question, the limits of democracy, when this is being used. But for me, I was also kind of thinking, nobody likes to think that they're being manipulated by an ad. Although, of course, we are. I mean, that's the whole purpose of advertising. It's like an arms race of, consumers being savvy to what advertisers are doing in this kind of race between us and advertisers. But at the end of the day, I don't really see how even very manipulative advertising, very targeted and manipulative advertising, to me, this is just the age that we are going into of just really, really powerful advertising. I mean, that could be maybe vote Trump, it could be buy Coca-Cola, it could be have a Big Mac, it could be anything. It actually makes a lot more sense to say buy Coke really than vote for Trump. I mean, that was a specific use, but at the end of the day, what turns into direct profit, it makes a lot more sense, and that's what these Facebook ads and these profiling and so on are about. And this is a technology, again, you could say this is weapons-based technology, this is psychological operations technology used by militaries, but it was being used for an advertising purpose. And this is the future of advertising that we have to face, and it's really interesting for me to think about, what does this mean for human evolution? I think this is a bit like when we introduce sugar into our diets and our bodies all sort of adapted. Well, maybe they haven't adapted, looking at the obesity problem. We kind of have to figure out how to evolve in a way to be savvy with this stuff. And again, it's also why, and you also watch this and think, well, this technology was being sold to right-wing parties. Well, what if the Democrats used the same? What if everybody had the same technology and was all using it? I mean, how messed up would people be for a start if they were all being subject to opposing PSYOPs weapons? It's kind of an arms race, but it's also kind of, to me, like the future of regular advertising, and I don't know how much you can try to criticize people being... nobody likes to think that they're susceptible to propaganda. Steve from Berkeley, you're correct, but it's designed to make people susceptible. It's like hypnosis. Nobody likes to think that they can be hypnotized, but of course most people can be. And this is where I'm stuck as well. I found this really fascinating. But it's kind of like, it still sounds to me like regular advertising, like very persuasive advertising. But it's kind of scary, and it's something to be extra vigilant about, I guess, with upcoming electoral campaigns. To me, the lesson is just don't pay any attention to internet ads, like put ad blockers in. Of course, it's not just that. They inject it into speeches, they inject it into messaging and whatnot. Maybe it's impossible to avoid. It gets into the news and everything. But you have to be really savvy and be aware that, and assume that all sides now are going to be using this kind of technology to persuade you to vote for them. And, you have to be aware of it, I guess. So yes, hey Perk, no worries. The show will be recorded. We're coming up 1 minute to go, and I've got like, geez, I really thought I'd finish with time to spare tonight, but let's just go through really quickly. Speaking of which, well, there we go. Half of teens are turning to YouTube for news, preferring influencers over traditional news. So all of you must be teenagers, obviously. And I'm very happy to have you here, kids, with my OP news information funneling through the interwebs. But you know what? I mean, no shit. I watch Philip DeFranco, most shows, and I actually see people putting effort into trying to create types of news that are not available. I can't stand watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC. I can't stand it equally to Fox. Yes, another paid billboard, and obviously open to manipulation much more than traditional media on the one hand, but there again, look at traditional media. I can understand why people don't want to watch it. So teens turn to YouTube for news. Well, it's amazing that they turn to anywhere for news. My recollection of being a teenager is that most people weren't interested in news, but there we go. But you're welcome to watch this, and thank you. More poop in Tokyo Bay, you don't need to do that. Delta, I fly to America for work every now and then, so great news. I don't have to go to Narita if I'm flying Delta. They're the only airline I've been flying recently. They're one of the... I picked the American airline that is not likely to punch you in the face, although they did lose my suitcase. But yes, less likely, 70% less likely to punch you in the face, fly Delta. So I fly with them, and if they're going to be flying out of Haneda, yes, because Narita sucks. I mean, it's far away, it's outdated. Haneda, you can get in and out of it really quick. And it's just everything about it's better, and the butter, if it's flying in through Haneda, gets in there much better. The South Korea Japan drama has been continuing, and really there's not much to say, honestly, other than it's just a bunch of I've come up with a good analogy for it, actually, particularly when I saw where was it, this guy, US urges Japan and South Korea to solve their issues. Thank you, America, thank you. That's a really good idea. We're going to work on that. Hell yes, we need butter psyops, damn straight. I remember there was a good thing on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart when he was mentioning, about debates that you should not try to get yourself in the middle of, and he mentioned on the west side of New York, or the northwest side, there is Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, and apparently, you never want to get into, you might be sincere and you might think, hey, you know what, I can help Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, get over the fact that he had sex with and married her daughter. Who he adopted. I mean, that was kind of messed up, I admit, and that's not something you want to get in the middle of trying to mediate, right? That's a situation where Woody Allen can do everything perfectly for the rest of his life, and he's going to be wrong about everything in her eyes, and he's not going to have an excuse, and no one is going to mediate that. And that's, to me, the best analogy I can think of for Japan-Korea relations. South Korea is entitled to be angry at Japan. You don't have to tell them to not be angry. And they don't have to be rational either. And for a lot of people in Korea, not all people in Korea, by the way, but for a lot of people in Korea, and it's manipulated politically because there's people, particularly on the left in Korea, who feel like this. Japan's always going to be the bad guy, and it's never going to be able to redeem itself. And even if it does anything right, it's always going to be wrong. And Japan's sitting there trying to do its best, but honestly, it's Woody Allen, and he did what Woody Allen did, so you're screwed, right? And US coming in saying, hey everybody, let's just hug, ain't gonna work. And besides which, you send John Bolton over, who's saying, hey, we need to get you guys in the alliance, both of you in the coalition. I mean, I was joking that he was going to come in and suggest that they make peace, bombing Iran together. And it's literally what he suggested. He was actually there in South Korea and Japan lobbying not for them to improve their relations, but for them both to join the maritime coalition patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, to protect shipping in the Persian Gulf from Iran, which would be the perfect setup, obviously, for a flashpoint to start a war with Iran. He was literally inviting South Korea and Japan to a war with Iran as a way of making up. America's got its own stupid issues to deal with. Let Japan and Korea have theirs. Camo butter, interesting thought. I did have a lot of butter while I was in Phuket, and it was very, very good. Trump suggested that Japan pay for security, and that might be a really good time for Japan, which is, by the way, converting its, I can't believe it's an aircraft carrier into an aircraft carrier. I can't believe it's not an aircraft carrier, the Izumo, which is a helicopter carrier. Now they've bought all these F-35s that can take off and land vertically. It's going to be an aircraft carrier, which sounds sneaky, but seriously, I mean, China's aircraft carrier was a Ukrainian casino, so, there's lies and there's lies. Trump, by the way, and others have blamed video games for the mass shootings in America. I'm not going to talk about that at length, other than I think that's just something where you see the people typically they want to blame things that are not themselves. They want to figure out what do these shooters all have in common that they don't have in common with me that we can attach blame to. Supporting guns is obviously not a good one because they all support that in common. White male, those are not good because often the people who come out and want to look for the blame, blaming the parents is one good way to do it, particularly if they're liberal parents. But yeah, video games is one that's come out. Violent movies, heavy metal, all this sort of stuff, which old people that vote for other old white people, can get in behind. Of course, ridiculous. Moon promised to counterbalance Japanese economic pressure with unification with North Korea by 2045 and cooperation with North Korea to have an economic boost, to which Kim Jong I've dropped the name. Kim Jong-un has been firing missiles every day and literally told Moon to take one of his North Korean missiles and screw himself with it. I mean, pretty much that's what the North Korean press agency said, so that didn't go down very well because of the military exercises over there. Moon's had a bad couple of weeks. What can you say? I mean, hell, maybe it's made him more popular over there, but I can't really see it working out. That's the end of the show. Actually, that's exactly 1 hour. It's 46 past, and I started at 46 past. There we go. Thank you again for joining, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. I have talked myself hoarse. I haven't talked like this for a while. I did have a good vacation. It's good to be back. It's good to have all of you back. Sergeant Bilko, that is a strange-looking emoji, but I'm glad that you found it. Great to see you all. I won't do a tune tonight because I'm back to work tomorrow, so I'm going to go get my beauty sleep, which I'm going to need a lot of. Hope you all have a good week. No, not the end of the show. Steve from Berkeley. It has to end sometime. I'll be back again next week. Don't worry about it. I'll be in America, by the way, on September 15th. I'll be arriving that day. I'm going to be jet-lagged and crazy. If you're in Seattle, hit me up. It might be cool to meet. But obviously that week I won't be able to do the show. Yes, other than that, if people could learn that they can choose how to respond as opposed to reacting to any given event, indeed believe in yourself. Good point. Good to see you, by the way. I'm sorry I didn't catch you earlier in the comments, but I think it's really incumbent on all of us. We have a kind of responsibility to learn about the technologies that are out there to manipulate us, just to make sure that we're being savvy and using them as much as possible in our own favor. And the more aware you are of them, I think the less they can impact you. But Steve from Berkeley, if you ever make it up from Berkeley to Seattle particularly, September 15 is when I arrive. It would be very nice to say hello anyway. But otherwise, I will, and if you're, of course, ever in Tokyo, I remember you can hit me up if you want to have lunch or whatever, if any of you ever make it up here. But otherwise, I'll be telling you what's going on in Tokyo every week, as I do in my own little way. And everybody here, have a good week, and I will see you all later. Kakite ano, peace. Ending the stream. Boom. Yes, I'm sure I would like to stop streaming.